Well, welcome everyone. I'm Aaron Lamb. I work for Teresa Corrales. I had the pleasure of taking over for our good friend Andrew here at the back of the room. And many of you know me, but if you do not, nice to meet you guys. Nice to meet you all. We're going to have a little conversation about that here, so I guess I'm getting right into it. So we're going to look at how to sell plants to the public. So the stuff that you guys do every day pretty much, and some of the tools to be successful, and looking at a little bit of customer service and also sales, and specifically plant sales. Do you guys need me to be over to the side a little bit here? Yeah. All right. Let's make sure I can hit my thing. Okay, so what is needed to be successful when selling plants to the everyday customer, the individual that really doesn't know anything about plants? I'm going to touch on greeting the customers, that first interaction. That customer interaction can be very important. Just that first initial touch that you get with that customer can be very beneficial. And then in terms of the sales, plant knowledge, current inventory available, the display or layout that you have with those plants to help assist in that sale, personal experience and observations, resources that are available that you can trust, your top 5 in those categories of those plants that you're trying to sell, and then how to improvise when you have sold out of your top choices, which we all get into later in the season, especially when we're getting into late summer into fall sales. So we'll kind of go over some of these different things. So customer service. So some of this kind of just goes with everyday customer service. But your first interaction can be really important when that customer first comes in the door. That first impression, it really does mean something. And if you have that bad first interaction, that customer could leave and you may never see them come back in again. And so even just saying hello may be enough to just keep that person walking around and looking for something, might find something that they ultimately need. If you don't say anything, you guys know how it goes. If you walk into a store and nobody greets you or says anything to you, you may have a question, but you don't always want to ask that question, or maybe it's not convenient because there's nobody there to talk to, you know, that's in a space where you can just easily ask a question. Right. So do not wait for the customer to show up to you. Be proactive. Initiate the conversation. Even if this may be a little ways away, if you're in your area and the customer's walking up to your area, then just say hello. And honestly, you'll get this, and I know we say this to each other, we say this to our friends, we say this to our family members. The two narratives that you'll get here is that you walk into a place and it was so busy that you don't get anybody to follow up with you. You don't get any of your questions answered. You're going to leave. You're going to be frustrated. You may never come back to that place again. Whereas if you can just take the time to say, hello, how are you doing? You know what, I'm really busy right now trying to help this other customer. But if you have the time and can wait a minute, I'll be with you as soon as I can, or I can get somebody else to help you as soon as someone else is available. That can make all the difference in the world. Even if they ended up walking out, they will potentially come back. They also will then tell other people and potentially give you that positive word of mouth business that you want. And honestly, the word of mouth is probably the most powerful advertisement you can have. If people like you and they enjoy you and they want to come to your space, then they're going to come back constantly. If you're helpful and you can be there and assist them, and even if you don't always have the answer, just being a good person can bring those people back. A couple things, and this, I know this is so challenging. For you all that work on the floor and deal with customers constantly, like you're out there, you get in, you just opened up the shop, and then you have customers walking right back to your area. You know, who knows what your situation is. You might have had a long night, you might be tired, you might have gotten an argument with your significant other. You may not be in that mood to just be able to pick up and start trying to sell something to a customer, you know, day in, day out. It might be your Friday. You might be tired. You know, those things come into play. But I think there's a couple really key things. That game face that you have that you just need to put on, and put on an appearance And it's not that you're trying to be fake or try to lie to these people, but you're just trying to make the interaction positive. Ultimately, you work in the industry where you're trying to sell plants. So you want to make that interaction positive for these different customers. So that game face can be key. That's a lot easier said than done. And the other thing that I would always kind of use as that term, and all of you have heard it, but is kill them with kindness. If you have a customer that's really difficult and they're just in a bad mood, which some people just are in bad moods, and who knows why that is. You don't know who they are. You don't know what their situation is. So if you just try to be really nice to them, have someone talking to you and they're constantly rude and the interaction's bad, and you just keep being nice and you keep killing them with kindness and you keep being nice, you're going to break that individual down eventually, and you're going to find that understanding. And when you're working with customers, sometimes it's easier to just kind of fall into that instead of trying to combat that attitude that they have. It may not be a normal person that you hang out with every day, but that's not what you're trying to accomplish here. You're trying to get them the information that they ultimately need. So, it sounds so simple, but it's a lot harder to do those things on a day in and out basis. Let's see what else I mentioned here. Selling plants is an enjoyable thing. It should be. I know not all of us are really hardcore plant enthusiasts necessarily, but this should be something that's enjoyable. It's a positive thing to plant plants. It's a positive thing to garden. I mean, these are good quality, day in, day out routines that people can do. I mean, this should be a positive atmosphere. There's no reason why there should be any sort of negativity behind it. Now, there's a lot more that goes into that, as we all know, and with everything with sales, and so it's not always the best situation. But if we can just kind of try to follow some of these things, it's really good. The other things is to be real and to be kind. Just be real. If you don't know the information, just say so. Probably can find it. They're going to be more thankful and come back to you because you were honest and you gave them that information, whether, versus you trying to tell them something that you don't really know. And that may give bad information that then will come back to get you later when they come back and they're upset because you gave them incorrect information. And then be kind. And this is just kind of a general thing. I've heard other people talking about this lately too. And I don't know if it's our time in the world or what it is, but it just seems like there's a lot of negativity out there, and we just need to remember that we're all people and we just need to be kind. And if you can have those basic philosophies and try to kind of do that when you're working with these customers, it may make things a little bit easier for you. Because I get it. I worked in retail for a long time, and I've had some really difficult customers, and it's not fun. It can leave you going home thinking about this stuff later with those bad interactions, and it's not enjoyable. It makes you not want to do the work that you're doing sometimes. So some of those things can really pay off, and you'd be surprised. Sometimes you may get people, let me make sure I didn't skip something here, I'm sorry. You may get people that you had no understanding of or whatever, and then you build a kind of a neat connection with, and you never know where they're from, what they're doing, or what their circumstance is. And sometimes it may end up being very beneficial for the sale that you're ultimately after here. So those are just real kind of basic customer service stuff. I say that first interaction, handle with care. So kind of how does it work when you have a customer? And you guys do this every day, so this is straightforward. But someone comes in, you say, "Hi, how are you doing today?" I like to be kind of aware. I found myself always saying guys. That's what I said the first thing when I first said this. I always tell everybody, be two old ladies walking in, and I say, "Hey, how are you guys doing today?" And so I try to be aware of what I'm actually saying, using words like all, like folks. If it is a couple ladies, using ladies. If it's a couple gentlemen, using guys. Use gentlemen, however that term is. I think some of those little minor things actually make a difference and put you into a mindset ready to work with these people. But I think it's also a respect that you're giving the individual to be a little aware of that. Not that there's anything wrong with calling a woman guys when you're using that term, because they know what you're really trying to say, but just trying to be a little more aware of your everyday interaction doing customer service. So can I help you find something today? It's really straightforward. I like this one a lot when someone comes in. Was there anything specific you were looking for? You may have a customer come in, say, "Hey, how's it going today? Can I help you find anything?" "You know what, I'm just looking right now." So try to follow up with that potentially. So then you maybe later they come walking back by the area. Hey, are you still finding everything okay? You know what? Yeah, well, everything's okay. You could ask them it a third time. They're going to give you the same answer potentially, but then all of a sudden you ask them, was there anything was there anything specific that brought you in here today? Were you looking for anything specific? All of a sudden you might get a whole can of worms that opens up from that. They might start talking about why they're actually there, what they're actually looking for. They might bring up that they were looking for blue fescue for this planting that they wanted, and they didn't see any anywhere. And well, you know what? We actually just got a truck in and they just got unloaded in the back. Let me go check real quick and see if they're available. Those little things, by just asking, was there anything specific, may open up a whole new realm that then gets you to get a sale. Whereas they might walk around for a while, and even if you just ask, can I help with anything, it may not be enough. So kind of dig a little deeper and really ask the question of what brought you in, because they did come in the store, right? So there's a reason why they're in your facility. So in terms of, we kind of covered that. If they say no, just try to touch them again. Try to follow up again at some point or another. This isn't that easy if you're an introvert and you don't really enjoy talking to people. But hopefully if you're out there on the sales floor and you're trying to sell this stuff, you enjoy having a good conversation, so you're going to want to touch with these people constantly. This goes across the board. It's just good to follow up with people. You feel like you're actually getting some service when you're at a place, which doesn't happen that much these days. So if the customer needs help, you may have gotten some information from asking that specific question that you were trying to get, but how do we go into that and where do we take it from here? So the customer says, you know, I'm looking for some plants to block my RV. So then you bring up the simple question, well, are you looking for something that's evergreen or deciduous? Now, we all know they're probably looking for something evergreen because that would make most sense. But you never know where it might go. Well, you know what? Actually, we're not even here in the wintertime. We're only here in the summertime. That might open up a whole new option for you. So just play your cards a certain way and give yourself those options, because you don't always have every species available to you to sell at that moment in time. So just keep that in mind. Now, with this customer, okay, so they want an evergreen. So then conifer or broadleaf. The customer says, well, I didn't even know I had any other options than juniper. So then that opens up a whole new avenue for you to then explain about all these broadleaf evergreens, the different conifers that are available, and kind of other things in between. You're talking evergreens. It might be something like pampas grass or giant saccatone, something that may not be a typical evergreen of what you think of, but will serve that purpose in that niche, to use as a windbreak or a block, whatever that might be. And there's lots of plants that fit these different niches, and so how do we get the information to the customer? So now you take them into the sales part of it. Okay. So selling plants, kind of just a little overview of the industry that we're in terms of just what do plants mean to people. So plants are living organisms. We need to remember that sometimes. With that said, we work in an interesting field where we cherish our plants for their longevity and for our landscapes and gardens, and want them to survive and be successful. They have meaning in our lives and can be like family. I apologize, I don't have this big enough for myself to read this, but I do want to read this by word here for you guys. Screw myself up. So they have meaning in our lives, and they can be like family. Some may have been passed down from generation to generation. They carry sentimental value and mean something to someone that may mean absolutely nothing to somebody else. This meaning goes beyond the landscape. It's cultural. It can be used in ceremony for traditional belief. It can be used culinarily. This meaning is broad, it's vast, and it's vast across the globe for cultures everywhere. Plants are embedded in our everyday lives and have been. The connections are present, and they are rooted deeper than what we sometimes realize, depending on the culture or the individual. On the other side of things, they also serve a purpose for so many people, especially in our nation here, but other countries as well. This doesn't necessarily retain and go worldwide, but for us here, plants are seasonal. We end up throwing them away. We use them for holidays, for short periods of time. Gardening and landscaping is a unique art form that is really to each their own. Now, there are practical applications for where we place and use plants in the landscape, but who are we to tell people what they can and cannot plant? Obviously, if there's a highly invasive species, we shouldn't be selling it anyways. There's moral things with that. And we all have our own personal opinions on what we enjoy planting, on what we like, but we aren't necessarily the ones that can come in and tell these individuals coming in that, no, I don't like that plant. I don't want you to buy that. I want you to buy this plant, because somebody's going to see a plant and they're going to like it for their own reasons. I have things like lilac and iris and things that were meaningful to my mother, that were meaningful to my grandmother. Whether they really were meaningful to my grandmother, I don't know, but she always had a lilac bush, so my mom took that down with the generations and it got passed along. So you have those things. So, you know, people come into your store, they want to buy something, you can't just push them away and say, no, we need to be planting exclusively xeric, because that's the moral and probably smart thing to do with climate change and everything else. They want what they see. They want what they knew from past states that they lived in, from past experiences, from their childhood growing up. Plants are really, really unique in that sense. And it's kind of interesting, and it makes it fun because it's a little bit different for everyone. And it really is, it's like a unique art form in the sense that everybody's own creativity gets put into it. But like you would be looking at art in an exhibit somewhere, everybody has their own take on this, and there's not a right or wrong reasoning. And that's kind of a really interesting and powerful thing. So we are not here to push a sale, but to educate and give customers the information to make an educated decision, and a smart one. This will ultimately lead to a happy customer, and in most situations, the sale of those plants. Remember that most of the time, if the customer took the time to enter your facility, they likely did for a reason. They want to buy something. Therefore, we want to make a sale, because that's why we're here. We're here to make this sale. Even if ultimately we love plants, we're selling the product that we have in this store. So how do we sell it? So when I talk about this, I just wanted to make a note. This is really for the down and dirty retail sales. What you guys do every day on the floor talking to customers. There's, you know, advertising and your different websites and all these different methods of making a sale ultimately. But this is really kind of focused on how do you sell that plant when we have it right here on site and the customer's right in front of us, and we need to talk to them about this information, and they have no knowledge at all. So going over some of these tools that we can use to make things easier for us. So know what you have in stock and where it's located. This seems pretty simple, but when you have a big facility and you have thousands and thousands of plants out there, especially in spring, when plants are coming and going faster than you can even blink your eye, it's hard to keep track of what's in stock. But if you have an idea of where things are and what you have, it makes life so much easier when talking to customers. They may just be walking by and ask you something real quick. You know, you direct them to that location. There's so-and-so out there that can help you with this. They're in charge of the trees and shrubs. It makes everything easier. If they ask you the question, you don't even know what the species is, or you don't know what the plant is. We've all had that happen to us. It's challenging. It's like it's a foreign language, honestly. It really is if you don't have that knowledge. So it's hard to sell plants to customers if you do not know what is physically on site. This can change quickly, but if an item has sold out, keep in mind, that's not a bad thing. We want that, so don't be disappointed because you had a bunch of something and then you sold it all. That's ultimately your goal. I had an employee, and I would hear him pick up the phone and answer and talk to a customer real quick, and he'd hang up. And I'd say, what were they looking for? And he'd rattle something off, and I said, well, we have 3 of them back over here, you know, whatever. And, oh, I didn't know we had those. And I'm like, well, you got to at least go out and look, or you could at least ask me or ask someone that might know. don't just assume that you don't have it. Refer to the person in that location or to the person that you may know, or walk the nursery in the morning and get an idea of what you have. If you can sell through those plants, especially if they've been sitting there for a little bit, it feels great. To miss a sale just because you didn't take the time to walk out and see if it's there is a whole different situation. With knowing where the stock is, if you help unload the truck, especially if it's a truck relevant to the area that you work in, if it's trees and shrubs, if it's perennials, if it's annuals, if that's your area, you should be helping to unload that truck. I know that doesn't always work. People's schedules are different. They're off the day the truck comes in. But for the most part, that's going to be the best way. You know, you unload that truck, everything gets organized when it gets unloaded, so that way you can check it in really quickly. You get to see all the plants. I don't know about you guys, but getting trucks of plants in is like Christmas. I mean, it's like seeing what they have, what other growers, what the plants look like. It's just so fun sometimes. And if you really are excited about plants, it's exciting. It is. You're like, oh my God, look at this. It's gorgeous. Like, look at the blooms on this thing. Look at the trunk on this. You know, I mean, there's things that, because we all know in this industry, plants come and go and crops change quickly. And so we get some really, really nice plants sometimes, and it's always fun to see those. So like I mentioned before, walk the nursery, walk the garden center, walk your areas to at least be aware so you kind of know what's going on. It's not always going to work. You're going to have somebody come in, they're going to buy every single one you ordered. You're not even going to plant it. It's going to be something you didn't sell for 3 years, and then you're going to buy 20 of them, and they're going to all disappear all of a sudden under your nose, and then everybody else is going to want them. Those things just happen. That's the way it goes. But knowing where your stock is, unloading the trucks, knowing what's going on, it sounds so simple, but it's really, really, really helpful. Display species to be successful. So this can be extremely helpful. Organize species by similar characteristic. Obviously, you're going to put certain container sizes together. You're going to put flats of annuals together. You're going to put 1 gallon flowering perennials together. You're going to put the 5 gallon material together. Use this to your advantage. Example that I have is evergreen shrubs. Somebody wants to talk about a privacy screen or a windbreak. You want to walk them to a location where you have these plants, and you want to have it in a vicinity where you can then walk them through all the different plants and all the specs that those plants have. So what size they are, what zone they are, when do they bloom? Are they good pollinator plants? Do they have a seasonal food source for birds or other wildlife? What kind of fall color do they have? What sun conditions do they need? What water requirements do they need? All these basic things that we talk about with plants every single day are so important to have. And so if you have everything together, it makes your life so much easier. So you go over to talk about a broadleaf evergreen, and here in Albuquerque, okay, so what do we use a lot? Euonymus, red tip, Photinia, Nandina, a lot of old ones used. Arizona rosewood. Some of the quercus, like Quercus turbinella, the shrub live oak that's native here, ends up being a nice evergreen. Even if it drops its foliage at some point in time, like oaks may do, they still work for that avenue. Having all those together makes your life so much easier. Having your junipers, an evergreen, some of these smaller cultivars of junipers, whether it's the chinensis or whether it's the scopulorums, they work really well for these purposes. So have them close to each other. I'm assuming that most people organize their facilities like this, but when your employees out there, you don't want to run these customers all over the place. You want to be able to just talk and show them these things, because what ultimately ends up happening is you're talking about multiple plants as you're describing what they're kind of asking you for, the need that they're searching for, and it opens up multiple avenues for them to then go with. Okay, well, they really like the Spartan juniper because it's really dark green and they like that foliage. But they had a different location that they needed something else, and the Wichita Blues were exactly what they wanted. You told them about all these different varieties already. They were coming in for one, but then they realized after you gave them the information and gave them a little education that actually, no, okay, these are going to work really well too. And you'll sell more than what you ultimately think just by talking about all these different plants. Even getting into evergreen shrubs, mention those other options. Mention some semi-evergreen stuff. Mention things like hypothetically a patchy plume that might stay a little semi-evergreen but becomes very dense. If you prune it a lot over time, it may serve in their landscape as an additional layer to that windbreaker screen, or it may be enough for what they're actually looking for. You don't know what they're gonna like or not like until you give them multiple options. If you go show them 2 things and say, these will work, they may see all these other plants, but if they have no knowledge of what they are, how are they going to know if that's a selection that they might have success with or not? It might sound simple to pick up the local, xeric guide and look through that, but if you don't have any knowledge about plants, it doesn't matter if you're seeing a full-size picture of a specimen or what it may be. It's really hard to make a decision sometimes. For those of us that have been doing this for a long time, there was a point when we didn't have that information and that knowledge, and you probably remember that time, and it was hard to answer questions. The longer you do this and the more knowledge you gain, it's just going to benefit you when talking to all these customers. Know what is available, or who may have it or who may grow it. So be aware of your vendors. Be aware of who gets the availability lists with your company. You may have a customer coming in, you might have shown them a few options, but they're kind of looking for a really specific plant. Well, be able to follow up quickly and look over an availability or contact the individual within your organization then can, because it may come down, like the example I have here, oh, they were looking for something specific. Well, we don't have any in stock, but we can get some from so-and-so and they have 230 available. If they are really available, would you like us to bring some in? Follow up with those things. Some of those little extra steps and going a little above and beyond may end up being really beneficial, not only to just an initial sale, but multiple sales in the future, and who knows. Now, I understand this is difficult sometimes. It doesn't always work. Customers are going to slip through the cracks. But if you can try to do a few of these things, it may just help out a little bit. And when we're really busy in spring, it's going to be difficult to be able to make those touches with everybody. You guys know how it goes. So many people go in and out through the facility. You got spring fever. They see gorgeous plants. They're just grabbing stuff. That's a kind of a different situation. We all do it if we're plant people. You'll be walking through a place and you see something you really like and you can't help yourself. You're just going to buy it. Even if you don't think it's going to do that well, or maybe it's not going to do that well for one reason or another, we buy some stuff. So, you're showing evergreen shrubs, and this doesn't necessarily windbreak, but you start talking about the Ericameria, the turpentine bush. This is a gire, which is the cultivar. But you tell some people some information. This plant is an evergreen shrub, a small evergreen shrub. This cultivar is approximately 3 by 3. True species is going to be 3 to 4. Ends up being a little bit woodier and not as dense over time with the true species. So this is actually a really good variety. If you have a good maintenance plan on this, like giving it a light prune once a year, or maybe you don't need to do it that much, you'll keep it looking tight and stout. It won't get so woody and you won't have the problems later. They can flush back through if you cut them down really hard like Chamisa, but they don't do it reliably, and I wouldn't recommend that. So having some little tidbits of information to pass along to your customer may be very helpful. If you guys are familiar with turpentine bush, it's one of the later bloomers we get for a native and gets covered and is a really, really good honeybee plant. The honeybees will be all over this thing. That might be the one little bit of information that customer is seeking. People do have bees, so that might be something they're looking for. They may want a native. They may want a plant they don't have to keep on drip after it's established. That's one of those plants. So by you having some of this information, it's very beneficial. Evergreen shrubs like Arizona rosewood. We talk about a windbreak. Here in New Mexico, probably 10 to 12 foot, maybe bigger, is a pretty decent size one. But you get down into the core of their range in Arizona in the canyons, on the hillsides, the biggest one they ever found was like 47 feet or something, tree form. So you can see how you could then give somebody some information. If I had to ask you guys what that was, you probably wouldn't have guessed Arizona rosewood necessarily. But you can just see the character. And for Albuquerque, that's something that's really appropriate. 20 years ago, we wouldn't have necessarily been saying that. But what we've learned over the last several decades and having individuals planted around town, making it through the really cold spell we had in 2011, all those bits of information play into that. And that could be a really cool small ornamental evergreen tree. You could put that right in the middle of your back patio area and have it landscaped around and have this little cool character tree that's evergreen. So kind of having information when you see these plants and being able to talk to customers about it is very powerful. So the plant knowledge, and this is also very easier said than done. It's hard to remember stuff about plants. It's hard to remember all these different characteristics. But if you can start to build that information and know a little bit, and every time you help a customer with that, build on what you learned before. So that way when they ask you again and you're walking with them to talk about these, you can talk to them about these plants. You don't need to go back and look. Maybe you don't remember the zone, maybe you don't remember the exact height, but you've seen this plant enough, you know it's a larger shrub. You can start to have that conversation with them. If you can memorize and remember the plant information, you will have a very easy time with this. It's pretty straightforward, but that is challenging. General information is what I'm talking about. Evergreen, deciduous, overall size, USDA zone. Describe its rough habit. Describe where you would see it in the landscape or in the wild potentially. These are all things that are very beneficial. The practical application for that plant in the landscape, or a practical application, because there's multiple for most of them. Be able to answer the general questions and add your personal experience. Personal experiences with plants is a tremendous selling point. Example, and I kind of try to keep with this theme because it's just easier for me to talk to you guys about it, but okay, Arizona rosewood. I had one planted at my old house in the university area. It grew fine, it was good, got a little more shade than it probably should have, but still was doing really well. I moved to a new location, planted a bunch of them up near the mountain, have a different soil type. It breathes a lot better. It drains a lot better. The growth that I got out of planting some Arizona rosewood in May, I was absolutely blown away by. It was over a foot or more. These things don't tend to be, that fast growers, but now I have a whole different perspective. You see on the medians driving around town, there's some, you have to be on some of the frontage roads, but right around the big eye, you'll see some Arizona rosewood. I think there's either a different species or it's a subspecies. There's a narrowleaf rosewood. There's some of those in there. You can see their habit. You can get a feel for what the plant does here in New Mexico. It's a dense evergreen shrub. Those experiences that you have, the first-hand experiences you have growing them and planting them in your yard, the experiences that you have seeing them and observing them over time, those are so beneficial to you being able to sell plants to customers and talk to them. Plant signs. Plant signs, as we all know, what was my cheesy thing I put here? A great sign with a picture and description is worth 1,000 words. I mean, it really can help you, but you still may need to assist in that sale because, as we all know, we can go read about something and maybe everything's laid out in front of us there. But when we don't know about that, we tend to be kind of skeptical a little bit. We don't quite know. We don't have that firsthand experience. We don't have somebody that we trust and we know giving us insight about that. So it's hard to decipher what you're getting in terms of information off a sign. But really good plant signs with good pictures are going to be super beneficial to you and to all your employees. So the benefits of having these signs is that when you're working with customers, if you have multiple customers and you're trying to get customers in and out of there as quickly as you can, but still have good customer service and give them the information they need, those signs are going to be your helpers. They're going to be those other employees that you have to help hold that customer while you're dealing with the other ones. And so you can direct them and say, back in this direction, the trees and shrubs, look for the Cercocarpus. You'll see all the different mahoganies in that area. We have 4 different species, and you'll see the sign, and it's going to say mountain mahogany or coral leaf mahogany, and you're going to see, maybe you tell them the botanical name. Whatever your description is, send them to that. Get them started. Get them reading about it. So that way when you get over to them, they're already kind of aware of what's going on. Where am I here? So it really is to be used as a reference. Example I had here. So Rhus trilobata, the 3-leaf sumac. A great choice for fall color. It's native. It's roughly 4 to 6 foot plus, tall and wide, and can be pruned. And actually, the cool thing about Rus charlibata, it's a native. Not a lot of people get super excited about stuff like this. But if you planted several of them closer than what the recommended width is, let them grow over time, constantly prune them, they actually start to interweave and intertwine themselves, and you keep pruning them, and the architecture and character of those branches just creates like a natural living wall. So it's not evergreen, but it still may serve a purpose for what somebody's looking for. So have those other bits of information to be able to share with people, because you just don't know. When you tell somebody something, you don't know. Maybe they really wanted something with fall color. Maybe they wanted a seasonal food source for birds because they're big birders and they want whatever, as many different berry plants as they can. All these things are beneficial, and by you just kind of giving a little bit of that interesting information to them, it's going to help you with the overall sale. So with having those signs, you know, you can be more general. You don't have to know every single thing that's out there. You can have a rough idea because you read it 10 minutes before, but you already forgot because you helped that other customer. Well, I think it's a zone 4, you know, and you go, oh, yeah, look at the sign. That's right. It's zone 4. Let me, you know, I think it's a zone 4. Let me double check real quick. You already have the sign there. You don't have to go find other information. You've already helped yourself out. So those plant signs, as we all know, can be very, very helpful, and they can be more helpful for you sometimes than the customer, because it may direct you to the right information that you were trying to hone in on that you either forgot or didn't have right on the tip of your tongue for one reason or another. So that's all really, really positive to have really good signs. Display garden or referencing actual specimens. So not a lot of nurseries and garden centers really necessarily have the space to be able to have a display garden. They may have stuff planted around, but having actual plants in the landscape that people can look at really, really helps. And we all know this. You have that tree in the parking lot, you have that tree on the property, or that shrub. People come in and, what is that blooming tree that's out front? It sells itself every time. You have customers come in and they're looking for a shade tree. If you have some shade trees on the property that are at least 7+ years old, that have a little size to them or so, time frame's gonna vary, but the ones that have some size to them, you can point those out to customers. They probably sell themselves most of the times. You guys all know that. It's so helpful to have some form of display with this. Referencing actual specimens. So maybe down the street, the neighbors have a bunch of Spanish brooms, and when they're blooming, everybody comes in here and asks you guys for them. Those things happen constantly throughout the seasons. Whatever species is in bloom or has that character that people are looking for, or that they actually end up noticing because it's caught their eye all of a sudden, that's what people are after. So we all know that, but be aware of that. Those tools help you. If you have a plant you want to sell, or you know you sell really well, probably sell it even better if you have one planted on site and you can see it and you can show it to the customers. So those things really help. If you can have a display garden of some form or have reference points with actual specimens, it's really, really a powerful selling tool. And it's nice because you don't have to do as much. You show them, they know what they want at that point. Oh yeah, that's exactly what my brother has, you know. That's what my neighbor has down the street. You know, these things come up. They had no clue. Most people have absolutely no clue about these plants. We got to remember that sort of thing. So how do we sell a plant to a customer that is looking at only the plant in the number 5 pot that you have for sale out there in your yard? So that's where, you know, the display gardens, specimens in town may help you with some of this. So pay attention. When you're going for a walk in your neighborhood, when you're going to your family's house, when you're driving to work, notice what the phenology is at that time of year. Notice what the plants are. As you all know, when you had no plant knowledge and then started to gain plant knowledge, your whole perspective on plants that are in the landscape, in the city, changed. I mean, I imagine all you had that same thing. You went from not recognizing plants to recognizing tons of plants that you know and you sell. Pay attention to those plants. Some of those individuals can teach you more by watching them over time and then relating personal experiences. And they really, really help and benefit. People want to hear about those plants and those situations, and that something's been growing for 2 decades here, and you know, this one's growing in a lot of shade. They should be taking full sun. These things are positive to use when selling plants to the basic and general public. Your own experiences and your observations. So just to dig into this a little bit more. So where are certain specimens that you know of? UNM's campus, the botanical gardens, the zoos, your neighborhoods, your parks, the medians. The medians are great. We all drive around. I wish that some of our medians looked a little bit better sometimes, but we do have some nice plantings in some of the medians. Pay attention to those. What are they planting? I mean, do you know what they are when they plant something and it's completely dormant? Pay attention to that stuff, because this stuff benefits you. Knowing that stuff, as we all know, customers bring in a sample of something in the middle of winter. These things help us out. So some of these examples, you know, something like Cercocarpus ledifolius, the crowleaf mountain mahogany, it's a really, really cool plant. Not everybody agrees with that. Not everybody thinks that. It's sometimes maybe a little more difficult to sell. So up off of Eubank and Wantabo, right, when you turn off Eubank onto Wantabo, there's one in the median there that it's a single trunk. It probably goes up about a foot or so, maybe a little less, and that thing's huge. It's got to be like 4 or 5 inch caliper. I mean, it's nice, and they'll get bigger than that, but you don't see a lot of large ones. So it's just this really cool specimen and goes up. Use that to your advantage when you're selling these plants. Describe to the customer what it can look like, what you can get out of it. Be aware of all those things. Your personal observations and your experiences are more powerful almost than any of this other stuff if you do know the plants. Chinese pistache going up past on Candelaria this year, all the way until sometime in December, they still had some foliage in the interior of them. I was blown away. I couldn't believe it. It was the way we got cool this year and the way the temperatures dropped. The outer leaves finally kind of dried up and got burnt around the edges, but there still was some green within the interior, and eventually that just kind of dried out. It's almost like it never did any sort of color change within those, but it was just to still have them holding on in December. You just don't see that in some years, so it just gives you this different insight. I have an apple tree that I got this year. I planted it in a really big container because I didn't know where I was going to put it. I figured, you know what, I like planting small trees in containers. I have some of these. I have mixed stuff. Anyways, I planted it. It still has its foliage on it. I think it's finally to the point where it's ready to fall off, but it's still kind of green. It was in an interesting location. Those are things that we can learn from. You're going to get weird questions asked from customers, and having that background knowledge is just going to open up your perspective to be able to answer all those really strange questions you get, especially the questions you get from individuals that don't have the plant knowledge. We know what those questions can be. It's all over the board. I mean, it's amazing what people ask you, and then you finally kind of get down to it, and you're like, oh, that's what you were talking about. And it may be something really simple, but when you don't have that plant knowledge, nobody knows this plant that well, but this example, Garrya wrightii, is Wright silk tassel. It's a native evergreen shrub. I'm familiar with it from doing field work in the Animas Mountains down in southwest New Mexico, and up on the dry hillsides, it's like 5 foot tall or so, and it's 6 to 8 foot wide. It's dense and full, hot, dry hillsides down there in southwest New Mexico. On the contrary, you'll also find them dropping down off these hillsides into these canyons and drainages. And you have individuals that are pushing up 8 foot plus. They don't have hardly any width to them at all. They've become gnarly, and I know Andrew likes that word there, it came out on me. Become woody and character over time, but they don't have any width to them. So you're seeing a different side to this same species that on a hot, dry hillside is going to show you one character, and down in a canyon bottom is going to show you another one. That opens up your perspective. So can that plant then potentially take more shade? Well, there's a good chance. If it's doing good down in that canopy in the canyon bottom, then it might be able to take more than you think. So these open up all these avenues here into helping make a sale of a plant. Resources that you trust, websites that you trust. This is important. You guys might, look something up real quick, and we've all done it. You look up a plant, maybe you do an image search on Google or whatever it is, and who knows what they have on there. You're looking at pink pampas grass, and then all of a sudden you have this bright pink flamingo colored plume on there because somebody's photoshopped it. If you're just looking at that and you don't know, you may think that's really what it looks like. So be aware, make sure you know the sites that you trust. Have those written down for your employees that are coming in that don't have this background. Give them some good sites that they can trust with information in terms of being able to look something up real quick. We all have different websites. For me, Missouri Botanical Gardens. If you get stuff from Mountain States, you might reference their info sheets. They're very good. Monrovia has good information on there. Hoffman Nursery doesn't sell to the general public, but they grow grass. If you go on their website, it's phenomenal, the information you'll get out of there. You want to know about grasses? Go on Hoffman's website. It is incredible what they have on there. These are beneficial resources that you can not only use for yourself, but direct to your customers. Have them do some research. You're going to get those people that don't really know what they want. Direct them to the right place so that way they can make some decisions for themselves. They may come back to you with the whole plant list of stuff that's just, you never find it. You don't see it available. There are those things that come up. But if you direct them to the right place, give them a little bit of information, and what we're going to talk about next here puts you into this to get stuff that you actually have available. Books are useful too. Something that I always use, so for those of you, and I don't think anyone knows this here, but besides maybe Andrew back here, my background's in herpetology. I did field work for over a decade, studying reptiles and amphibians. So when I started really working with plants, I had a different perspective than coming, from just working with plants alone. So I use a lot of field guides because I always used field guides. And for me, having a good field guide, whether it's something like Trees and Shrubs in New Mexico, or this is the bird guy Sibley, if you guys know David Sibley, has great drawings in this tree book. This gives you the first information that can really help you answer some questions sometimes. There's range maps in here. You can get good ideas of where these plants naturally grow in the wild. Some plants don't have a lot of information online, so you need to look at other sources. These aren't going to give you all of those specific informational characters of what you're trying to get out of the plant, like size and height. It may not have that in here, but some of these can really answer some questions. You don't know what zone something is, or you're not curious if something will do better on the other side of the mountain. Well, what elevation does it go up to in here? The cool thing about, and there's a lot of good resources out there. I probably don't even know half of them. But the Sibley's cool because he talks about a lot of the invasive species or the non-native species. And he has this little tidbit at the bottom that then gives you a little bit of information, like in terms of where it's escaped and where it's invasive, or if it's commonly cultivated. Just gives you a little bit of information. It also has really good pictures to give you that spec. J. Frank Schmidt's another company that has really good info sheets. Those, being able to look at those images of a shape of a plant and get that description and also have all the information are really, really powerful tools. Sometimes we may need to direct the customers to the right place, or our employees or ourselves, to find that good information. So have kind of your list of what you use and stick with it. It can be a really good tool to just be able to pull up quickly and get that USDA zone that you needed to answer that question for that customer that lives in the East Mountains. You just had to double check. You thought this plant would do fine, but you didn't remember what the zone was. These are little things that can get people in and out that may be really helpful. And when you don't have that answer, as simple as it seems, it makes things a lot more difficult. So top 5, and this could be your top 7, this could be your top 10, this could be your top 3. I don't know how you guys would want to organize this, but having your category that you kind of know of, and maybe that is a list that you actually have. Maybe it's something that you kind of have in the back of your head, that you kind of have your go-tos for each category here. But flowering perennials, ground covers, you throw in evergreen ground covers into that, grasses, deciduous shrubs, evergreens, ornamental trees, small shade trees, shade trees, medium to large. There's always overlap with some of this stuff. You're talking about ornamentals. Well, some ornamentals may kind of classify as a small shade tree. So you can have some overlap with these. It doesn't have to be specific, but having this right on the top of your head with stuff that you know you bring in all the time is going to be very beneficial. For evergreen ground covers, gray creeping germander, Tacrenia maronium, different thyme species like pink chintz, red creeping thyme, some of the veronicas, the Turkish or the woolly, the bearberry, the Arctostaphylos, or maybe you have a different setup in the landscape where they buy multiples of panchito or whatever it is to create that look. Have different things that you use. The Delospermas specifically, like the Nubigenum or Dieri, the actual evergreen varieties. Some of the ground cover sedums that are evergreen, especially Angelina, that gets this wicked fiery orangey color in the wintertime. These are characteristics of evergreen ground covers that people really like, and these all should be things that sell. The manzanitas, the Arctostaphylos, are hard to find. We all know that. I imagine some of you guys bring them in regularly, but they do really well here. Have kind of that idea of what you can talk to people about and where you can direct them. And this goes with across the board with all these. And I know I'm focusing more on the perennial side, but this also overlaps into the annuals and into houseplants and everything. You kind of have those go-tos that you work with, so when you first initiate a conversation, you kind of know what you're going to talk about. So this doesn't sound, it's easier said than done. It doesn't always work. We sell through all this stuff. We get into July, we get into August. Later in the season, we're not ordering full trucks from these companies. We're not going to see this species again until next year. There's all these factors that play into it that sometimes the general public doesn't quite understand. If you have the knowledge, you can then improvise with what you have. And this is still going to be a challenging thing, but you can at least attempt to help that customer make a sale with something you actually have physically on site. We all know this is a challenging thing, but every once in a while when working with customers, you bring up a certain species and maybe it's been sitting there for a while and you haven't sold it, and for whatever reason, they want it. You have no idea. You may have plants that sit there for years and then all of a sudden somebody buys them. It's really interesting, and we never know what somebody may or may not be interested in or like. And the only way that we're going to get there is by giving them some of that information. So don't hesitate to talk about plants that you may not even like, or you don't think are that attractive, or you think have been sitting there for a long time. I'm not telling you to sell the ugly stuff that's there and push something on somebody that doesn't look as good a quality, and that's the reason why it's still sitting there. I'm not talking about that situation, but I'm talking about stuff that's hard to sell. Plants that maybe you brought in because you thought it looked good on paper, but for whatever reason, it's just a really difficult sale. Sometimes some plants might sell like crazy one year and the next year they don't. It's just a really weird thing that we don't always know the answer for. So when you are improvising and talking about these plants, as you walk with the customer and explain it to them, that's where that background knowledge about the plants, that's where those plant signs become really beneficial. Using your top 5 may be what you have to go back to. You may not have any of those species, and you may ultimately have to go back to that because the customer wasn't satisfied with what they saw that you had, and they do want to buy something, and they have a place in their landscape where they're going to fill that niche one way or the other. So then going back to your top 5 and maybe explaining to them the situation and moving forward from there. It doesn't always work, but if you have the knowledge, if you have good plant signs, you should be able to use all these things that we've kind of talked about and be able to promote some of this other material, even if you're not as familiar with it. Okay, so in terms of bringing this back, now I think all of us here are probably on the retail side. Am I correct by saying that? They wanted me to talk a little bit about, like, from a landscaper's perspective, from a design type perspective. Well, these things overlap. Obviously, those individuals don't work with day-to-day retail and don't have plants in their facility necessarily that they can then go show customers and make that sale. But if a designer's doing a design and gives that design to the customer, and the customer's not satisfied with something that they see on there, well, then you need to potentially come up with an alternative for that area. Well, using some of these things can be really beneficial. Have your top 5. They want something evergreen. They didn't like the choice you had there originally. Give them a few more options. Know what fits in that same size category as what you had already originally put down there. And from a landscaper's perspective too, you know, having your own list of a top 5 is really beneficial. If those individuals work closely with certain nurseries, well, maybe they use that nursery or garden center's top 5 list of all these different varieties and species. You know, the websites, the books, and more for the landscaper side, if they ever had customers that needed to make changes. And I don't know if all of them are dealing with this day in, day out like we are. But having really good resources to then send them to is just going to benefit your customer and yourself. So know where specimens are around town, the same things we already talked about. These are tools that are very, very valuable. If you can direct somebody to look at something, or if you can describe to them what is out there, then those tools are going to be really, really powerful. The personal experiences, past jobs, using those as examples, you know, things that are in your own yard and landscape, and also in areas that you are regularly, that you frequently see, that you see day in, day out, or week in, week out. Those personal observations are all going to benefit you down the road. And I think that's all I have.